There was a time in Western history when beauty was not measured by strength, energy, or vitality, but by how close someone appeared to fading away. Pale skin was admired. Thin bodies were praised. Soft coughing, flushed cheeks, and a distant gaze were seen as signs of refinement rather than warning signals. What we now recognize as symptoms of a serious illness were once mistaken for elegance. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe was changing faster than ever before. Cities grew crowded, factories filled the air with smoke, and social pressure tightened around appearance and class. In this world, beauty became a form of identity, especially for women. To look fragile was to look gentle. To look weak was to look cultured. And unknowingly, society began to admire the outward signs of one of the deadliest diseases in human history. Tuberculosis, long before it was fully understood, quietly spread through homes, salons, and art studios. It did not arrive loudly or suddenly. It lingered. It transformed the body slowly. And in doing so, it reshaped fashion, literature, and ideals of femininity. Writers romanticized it. Painters softened it. Poets gave it tragic beauty. The disease even earned poetic names, as if giving it elegance could make it less real. This story is not about fear, it is about misunderstanding. It is about how culture, when separated from knowledge, can turn suffering into style. It is about how an entire generation failed to see danger because it looked too beautiful to question. Before we continue, take a moment to support the channel. If you enjoy stories that explore the hidden intersections between history, culture, and the human mind, consider liking the video and subscribing. Your support helps these stories reach more people and allows us to continue exploring the strange paths of the past together. Now, let us step back into a time when illness wore the mask of beauty, and beauty slowly became something dangerous. There was a time in Western history when beauty was not associated with energy, strength, or health, but with something far more delicate and unsettling. To be beautiful was to appear pale, thin, and almost transparent. A body that seemed fragile was seen as refined. A face that looked tired was considered thoughtful. Weakness, strangely enough, became a symbol of elegance. This idea did not appear suddenly. It grew quietly within the social fabric of Europe during the late 18th and 19th centuries, a period marked by enormous change. Cities expanded, industries rose, and daily life became louder, faster, and more crowded. Amid this transformation, the upper classes began to define themselves not through labor or physical ability, but through appearance. Looking untouched by hardship became a form of social status. For women in particular, beauty was tightly controlled by expectation. They were expected to take up little space, physically and socially. A woman who looked strong was often seen as improper, too close to manual labor, too distant from refinement. Fragility, on the other hand, suggested leisure, sensitivity, and emotional depth. It implied that a woman did not need to work with her body, because her value existed elsewhere. Fashion played a central role in reinforcing this ideal. Corsets narrowed the waist and restricted breathing, creating a silhouette that emphasized delicacy rather than comfort. Dresses were designed to soften the body's outline, making women appear lighter, almost as if they might drift away. Pale colors dominated wardrobes, while parasols and gloves were used to protect skin from sunlight, preserving an artificial whiteness that signaled privilege. Cosmetics followed the same logic. Skin was powdered to appear lighter, sometimes dangerously so. A hint of color on the cheeks suggested natural blush, an illusion of gentle warmth beneath a fragile surface. The goal was not vitality, but controlled vulnerability. Beauty became something carefully constructed to look effortless, even though it required constant effort to maintain. Within this world, physical weakness was rarely questioned. Fatigue could be interpreted as sensitivity. Loss of appetite might be seen as refinement. A quiet demeanor was praised as modesty. When the body sent warning signs, society often responded with admiration instead of concern. This was also an age deeply influenced by romantic ideals. Art and literature celebrated emotion, introspection, and melancholy. Pain was not always something to be avoided. It was something to be expressed, even admired. The suffering individual was often portrayed as more profound, more meaningful, more human. Against this cultural backdrop, the boundary between illness and beauty became dangerously blurred. What makes this period particularly striking is how closely the idealized image of femininity aligned with the early outward signs of a serious disease. Pale skin, weight loss, a delicate frame, soft coughing. These traits did not stand out as alarming. They blended seamlessly into what society already wanted to see. But at the time, there was little understanding of why bodies changed in these ways. Medical knowledge was limited. Germs were invisible, and disease was often explained through imbalance, emotion, or moral weakness. Without clear explanations, people relied on appearances and narratives. And appearances, in this case, were deceiving. As cities grew more crowded, living conditions worsened for many. Poor ventilation, long working hours, and shared spaces created the perfect environment for illness to spread. Yet the disease did not discriminate. It reached into wealthy homes and artistic circles, touching lives that seemed protected by status. Because its progression was slow, it did not inspire immediate fear. Instead, it became part of everyday life. Families adjusted. Communities adapted. Symptoms were normalized. When someone grew thinner or weaker, it was often explained away as stress, temperament, or sensitivity. In women especially, these changes could even increase social admiration, reinforcing the dangerous idea that fragility was something to aspire to. At the same time, art continued to shape perception. Portraits depicted women with distant gazes and soft expressions, their bodies appearing almost weightless. These images circulated widely, reinforcing the idea that beauty was something quiet, restrained, and slightly sorrowful. Literature echoed this theme, presenting female characters whose physical decline was framed as emotional depth rather than physical distress. Slowly, almost without intention, society began to associate decline with desirability. The weaker the body appeared, the more refined it seemed. This was not a conscious choice made by individuals alone, but a collective shift in values shaped by fashion, art, and misunderstanding. What no one realized yet was that this ideal was being shaped by something far more dangerous than taste or trend. A disease was moving through the population, altering bodies in ways that perfectly matched society's expectations. And because those expectations were already in place, the warning signs went largely unnoticed. This is what makes this moment in history so unsettling. It was not ignorance alone that allowed the problem to grow, but admiration. The very traits that should have raised concern were being praised. Beauty did not merely ignore illness. It welcomed it. By the time questions began to surface, the illusion was already deeply embedded in culture. Fragility had become fashionable, Weakness had become aesthetic, and few were prepared to ask what price was being paid for this dangerous ideal. In the next part of this story, we will see how this misunderstanding evolved further, as illness moved from being quietly accepted to being openly romanticized. How writers, artists, and society itself transformed disease into poetry, and how a slow, silent thread gained a powerful cultural identity. But for now, this is where it begins. Not with fear, not with panic, but with admiration. By the time society began to notice that something was wrong, tuberculosis was no longer just a medical condition. It had already become a story, a symbol, a presence woven deeply into art, literature, and the collective imagination of Western culture. Unlike sudden illnesses that struck quickly and left little room for interpretation, tuberculosis moved slowly. It lingered. People lived with it for months, sometimes years. This slowness made it strangely familiar. It did not announce itself with chaos or panic, but with gradual change. A little weight lost, a little strength fading, a cough that came and went. Enough to notice, but not enough to frighten. In a world without modern medical understanding, people searched for meaning rather than causes. When no clear explanation existed, imagination stepped in. And imagination, shaped by art and emotion, turned illness into narrative. Writers were among the first to transform the disease into something symbolic. In novels and poems, characters affected by tuberculosis were often portrayed as sensitive souls, emotionally deep and spiritually refined. Their physical weakness was not described as failure, but as evidence of inner richness. The body, slowly fading, became a metaphor for purity, sacrifice, and tragic beauty. Female characters in particular were written as ethereal figures, their suffering presented as quiet and graceful. They did not rage against their condition. They accepted it with calm resignation. This portrayal reinforced the idea that illness could be dignified, even desirable. Pain was softened by language. Decline was framed as destiny rather than danger. Art followed the same path. Paintings from the period often showed women with pale skin, slender frames, and distant expressions. Their bodies appeared fragile, almost weightless. These images were not meant to disturb. They were meant to move the viewer emotionally, to evoke sympathy, tenderness, and admiration. Over time, these artistic representations shaped public perception more powerfully than reality ever could. When people encountered illness in real life, they unconsciously compared it to what they had already seen on canvas and in books. If it looked familiar, it felt acceptable. If it matched the aesthetic they admired, it felt less threatening. The disease also gained a reputation as the illness of artists. Many well-known writers, musicians, and painters were affected by tuberculosis, often during the height of their creative lives. Their early deaths only strengthened the myth. Society began to associate the disease with heightened sensitivity, emotional intensity, and creative brilliance. This belief was comforting in a strange way. It suggested that suffering was not meaningless, that pain might be the price of depth, that a fragile body could house an extraordinary mind. In a time when life was uncertain and death was common, such ideas offered a sense of order and purpose. But this romantic interpretation came at a cost. As illness became symbolic, its reality was increasingly ignored. The daily discomfort, the isolation, the gradual loss of strength were pushed aside in favor of the story people wanted to tell. Those who suffered were admired, but rarely understood. Language played a crucial role in this transformation. Tuberculosis was given poetic names, words that softened its presence and made it easier to accept. Naming has power. When something dangerous is described gently, it becomes easier to live with, easier to ignore. Meanwhile, the disease continued to spread. Crowded cities, poor ventilation, and shared living spaces created ideal conditions for transmission. Yet because the illness was associated with beauty and refinement, it did not carry the same social stigma as other diseases. In some circles, it even carried a strange prestige. Families spoke of it quietly. Communities adapted. The disease became part of everyday life, an unspoken background presence. Because it progressed slowly, people had time to adjust emotionally. Fear faded into familiarity. Familiarity into acceptance. For women, the consequences were particularly profound. The cultural image of the delicate, fading woman became deeply embedded in expectations of femininity. Illness was no longer something separate from identity. It became intertwined with how women were expected to look, behave, and even feel. Some women were praised for their endurance, their calm acceptance of physical decline. Their suffering was framed as grace under pressure, reinforcing the idea that a woman's value lay in how quietly she endured discomfort. Strength, when it appeared, was often overlooked. The danger of this mindset was subtle but severe. When suffering is admired, there is little motivation to prevent it. When illness is romanticized, urgency disappears. The focus shifts from healing to storytelling, from care to symbolism. Medicine, still limited in its understanding, struggled to challenge these beliefs. Without clear evidence or effective treatment, doctors could offer little more than observation and speculation. Fresh air, rest, and isolation were recommended, but these measures addressed symptoms rather than causes. The deeper truth remained hidden. As long as science could not explain the disease, culture filled the gap. And culture, shaped by emotion and aesthetics, chose a narrative that was comforting rather than accurate. This period in history reveals how powerful stories can be. They do not simply reflect reality. They shape it. When a society tells itself that illness is beautiful, people begin to see beauty where danger exists. When suffering is given meaning, it becomes easier to tolerate, even when it should not be. By the late 19th century, the romantic image of tuberculosis was firmly established. It appeared in novels, operas, paintings, and personal letters. It shaped fashion, behavior, and expectations. It influenced how people treated the sick and how the sick understood themselves. But beneath this carefully constructed image, the disease continued its quiet work. Bodies weakened, lives shortened, families mourned, and slowly, questions began to surface. Why did so many young people fade so early? Why did entire households fall ill? Why did no amount of grace or sensitivity prevent decline? These questions marked the beginning of doubt. And doubt, once introduced, would eventually make room for something far more disruptive than art or literature: science. In the next chapter of this story, we will move to the most dangerous phase of all. The moment when society did not merely accept illness, but began to imitate it. When fashion, behavior, and desire aligned so closely with disease that people actively chased the appearance of being unwell. This is the point where misunderstanding turns into harm, where admiration crosses into obsession, and where the cost of romanticizing suffering becomes impossible to ignore. By the time tuberculosis had fully embedded itself into culture, Something deeply unsettling began to happen. The disease was no longer only tolerated or romanticized. Its outward signs had become desirable. Society did not merely accept the image of illness. It began to imitate it. This shift did not occur overnight. It was the result of years of admiration layered upon misunderstanding. When fragility had been praised for long enough, it stopped looking like danger and started to look like identity. To appear delicate was no longer unfortunate. It was aspirational. In social circles where appearance carried enormous weight, women learned quickly what was rewarded. Thinness drew attention. Paleness suggested refinement. A quiet demeanor implied emotional depth. None of these traits were invented by the disease, but tuberculosis intensified them, making them more visible and, paradoxically, more desirable. Fashion adapted accordingly. Clothing became lighter, emphasizing narrow frames rather than strength. Corsets tightened further, shaping bodies into silhouettes that limited breathing and movement. The discomfort was accepted as part of elegance. A restricted body was considered controlled, disciplined, and therefore admirable. Beauty routines became rituals of concealment and imitation. Skin was lightened to preserve a pale complexion. Cheeks were colored just enough to suggest gentle warmth beneath apparent fragility. Dark circles beneath the eyes were no longer something to hide completely. They hinted at sensitivity and introspection. The goal was not to appear healthy, but to appear delicately unwell. Dietary habits followed the same pattern. Eating little was praised as self-control. Loss of appetite was interpreted as refinement rather than a warning sign. Some women intentionally restricted food, believing that thinness would bring admiration and social acceptance. The line between discipline and harm grew dangerously thin. Indoor life became another marker of status. Sunlight darkened the skin, so time outdoors was limited. Pale skin, protected from the elements, suggested a life removed from labor and exposure. Staying inside was framed as elegance, even as it reduced physical resilience and, ironically, increased vulnerability to illness. In this environment, the image of tuberculosis became detached from its reality. The disease itself remained destructive, but its visible effects were selectively admired. Society focused on what could be aestheticized and ignored what could not. Pain, weakness, and isolation were pushed out of sight, while surface-level signs were elevated. This was the most dangerous stage of all. When people desire the appearance of illness, prevention loses its meaning. When suffering is fashionable, warning signs are no longer taken seriously. The body's messages are overridden by social reward. For those actually affected by tuberculosis, the experience was profoundly isolating. Their reality did not match the image. The admiration they received was often superficial, fading as symptoms progressed beyond what could be romanticized. As strength diminished and discomfort increased, fascination turned into distance. Families watched loved ones struggle while society continued to celebrate the aesthetic of decline. The contradiction was stark. What was praised in public was feared in private. The same traits admired in art and fashion caused quiet worry behind closed doors. Medical understanding remained limited, and without clear explanations, harmful behaviors persisted. Doctors could advise rest and fresh air, but they could not yet explain why the disease spread or how to stop it effectively. In the absence of certainty, cultural habits held greater influence than medical caution. The obsession with appearance also reinforced rigid expectations placed on women. Endurance became a virtue. Silence became strength. Expressing discomfort was often discouraged, as it conflicted with the image of graceful fragility. Women were expected to carry suffering lightly, without complaint. This mindset shaped how illness was experienced emotionally. Many internalized the belief that their physical decline reflected personal identity rather than external threat. When the body failed, it was often interpreted as destiny, sensitivity, or temperament, rather than a condition that required intervention. The imitation of illness extended beyond individuals. Entire trends formed around delicacy. Art, fashion, and social behavior aligned to reinforce the same narrow image of beauty. Deviation from this image risked social disapproval. Health, ironically, could make one appear coarse or unrefined. Yet beneath this carefully constructed world, reality continued to press forward. More people fell ill. More families were affected. The pattern became harder to ignore. While the aesthetic of fragility was still admired, its consequences were becoming impossible to fully conceal. Whispers of doubt began to circulate. Why did so many young women grow weaker? Why did elegance so often end in disappearance? Why did refinement seem to shorten lives? These questions marked the beginning of a shift. They did not immediately dismantle the illusion, but they weakened it. Slowly, the desire to look unwell gave way to concern. Curiosity replaced admiration. And in that space, science would soon find its voice. The era of imitation was unsustainable. A society cannot endlessly admire what destroys it. The gap between image and reality had grown too wide. In the final part of this story, we will see how this dangerous illusion finally collapsed. How science revealed what culture had hidden, and how a new understanding of health began to reshape beauty itself. This is the moment before the awakening. The last stage of admiration. Before the truth became unavoidable. For a long time, tuberculosis existed in a space where questions were asked quietly and answers arrived slowly. Society had grown accustomed to uncertainty. But history rarely allows illusions to last forever. Eventually, curiosity becomes pressure, and pressure demands clarity. By the late 19th century, something began to change. Patterns that once seemed poetic now appeared mathematical. The same symptoms appeared in the same conditions. Entire families fell ill in confined spaces. Crowded neighborhoods suffered more than open countryside. What had once been described as fate began to resemble a pattern. For the first time, the disease was not approached through metaphor or emotion, but through observation. Scientists began to look not at the beauty of decline, but at its consistency. They compared environments, behaviors, and outcomes. Slowly, a new language emerged. A language of cause rather than meaning. This shift was unsettling. If illness had a cause, then it was no longer a symbol. It was no longer destiny or sensitivity. It was something external. Something that could, in theory, be confronted. When the idea emerged that tuberculosis was not inherited, not poetic, but transmissible, it shattered the cultural narrative built over generations. The disease was no longer a quiet companion of artists and dreamers. It was a presence that moved from body to body, indifferent to beauty, talent, or virtue. This realization forced society to look at itself differently. The very environments once praised for refinement, closed rooms, heavy fabrics, indoor life, were suddenly seen as dangerous. Elegance was no longer protective. In some cases, it was deadly. Public attitudes shifted gradually, but decisively. Fresh air, once associated with labor and exposure, became a symbol of health. Sunlight, previously avoided to preserve pale skin, was reinterpreted as restorative. The aesthetic of fragility began to lose its appeal. Medical spaces changed as well. Sanatoriums were built not as places of mystery, but as environments designed for recovery. Wide windows, open balconies, and structured routines replaced isolation and resignation. Patients were encouraged to rest, but also to breathe, to move, to reconnect with the physical world. This transformation affected fashion, behavior, and social values. Bodies that appeared strong and capable were no longer seen as unrefined. Vitality became admirable. Color in the face suggested life rather than excess. Strength began to replace delicacy as a sign of well-being. The shift was not without resistance. Cultural ideas do not disappear easily, especially when they have been romanticized for decades. Some continued to cling to the old image, believing that something meaningful was lost when illness was stripped of symbolism. But reality was difficult to ignore. As understanding grew, survival improved. The difference was visible. Fewer young people faded quietly. More returned to daily life. The cost of illusion became undeniable. For women in particular, this change marked a subtle but important liberation. Health was no longer seen as incompatible with grace. Expressing discomfort became acceptable. Seeking care was no longer framed as weakness. The expectation to endure silently began to loosen. Science did not erase suffering, but it changed how suffering was interpreted. Pain was no longer proof of depth or refinement. It was a signal, a message from the body that deserved attention rather than admiration. This new perspective also reshaped storytelling. Literature and art slowly moved away from glorifying decline. Illness, when depicted, became something to be confronted, not celebrated. Recovery gained narrative value. Survival became meaningful. Tuberculosis itself did not vanish overnight, but its image did. The romantic disease lost its power over imagination. What remained was reality, complex, imperfect, but grounded in understanding. Looking back, this period in history offers a powerful lesson. When society lacks knowledge, it fills the gap with stories. Stories can comfort, but they can also mislead. When beauty is found in suffering, danger becomes invisible. The end of the illusion was not just a medical breakthrough. It was a cultural awakening. A moment when humanity chose clarity over comfort, truth over poetry. And in that choice, something essential was regained. Health was no longer an aesthetic. Strength was no longer something to hide. Life, in all its unpredictability, was valued not for how gracefully it faded but for how fully it could be lived. This story is not only about the past, it is a reminder of how easily perception can distort reality, of how important it is to question the narratives we inherit, and of how progress often begins not with answers, but with the courage to ask the right questions. Thank you for spending this time with this story. If it moved you, consider supporting the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it with others who enjoy thoughtful historical storytelling. And now, as the story comes to rest, we wish you a peaceful night. Sleep well, and thank you for listening.